Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Oregon Active Transportation Summit. My name is Judge Kemp, Program and Events Director at the Street Trust. My pronouns are he, him. Before we begin today, I just want to give our land acknowledgement that the Street Trust would like to acknowledge the land we are occupying. The Portland metro area rests on traditional village sites of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Kaplamet, Clackamas, bands of Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes who made their homes along the Columbia River. We take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land. And also, I just want to say on behalf of the Street Trust, thank you to you for joining us today for this wonderful session. So we are in multicultural commercial reentry programming, reimagining the public right-of-way and transit-oriented development. Our presenters, are Quincy Brown and Aiden, you're gonna have to chime in, Aiden Becker, are your presenters today. Please use the social media tag hashtag OATS21 to post your summit on social media. And don't forget to visit our website at thestreettrust.org to learn more about our programs and activities, including SB 395, also known as the Safe Routes for All campaign, for an update on the historic bike bill on its 50th anniversary that the Street Trust is championing in the Oregon session this year. Anyone interested in claiming AICP credits for attending this session, please log into the OATS SCED platform and find the AICP certificate download link near the bottom of the keynote description. Now, without further delay, please welcome to your screen, Quincy Brown.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I'm going to share my screen and we can get started. Again, thank you so much, Judge, for the warm introduction. Like Judge mentioned, we are here for the Multicultural Reentry Program, looking at commercial development, mobility, and access. And this is the Oregon Active Transportation Conference. So who are we? My name is Quincy. I'm a co-founder and principal planner at We All Rise Consulting, an urban planning and stakeholder engagement firm. My background is in active transportation, particularly looking at the intersection of race, public space, and access, and how to develop communities, particularly around transportation, that have maybe not seen the benefits of services as urban renewal projects have gone into play. I've worked on a number of projects, including the LA River Project, the Gold Line Project, and various projects in Oakland looking at redeveloping Black cultural zones. I was formerly at Alta Planning as a planner and recently started We All Rise out of the dire need for a firm like this in Oregon. And I'll let Aiden introduce himself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Aiden. I'm the senior planner at We All Rise and events in November. My background is largely in education. I worked as a teacher. I worked on curriculum development around the world. Argentina, in Zimbabwe, Uganda, Israel, Palestine. And I'm also very passionate about the development of mobility and active transportation in American cities. Grew up noting the vast disparities that exist in cities based off of how one is able to get to work, what modes of transportation people have access to. And I'm excited to, work on this with all of you and to make Oregon a more accessible place.
Just to note, Aiden and I are both from Portland. I went to Grant High School and Aiden went to Lincoln. We also have some other members on our team as well that are unfortunately unable to make it today. Erica Sims, Gabriel Gonzalez Vega, and Maris Odana. So We All Rise, who are we? We All Rise, like I said, is a stakeholder engagement firm. We focus on integrity and development and realize that the development field has been hostile, particularly towards underserved community members. And to really address these issues, we need to be looking at all levels. And so we try to bring integrity, equity, diversity, and inclusion and access into all levels of system planning. So we look at DEIA training, so going into organizations and supporting the internal ideas around diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. Mobility transportation, so working with organizations like SPEN, like TriMet, like Metro, and really trying to understand how to influence and develop mobility resources that work for folks. Equity-driven community engagement, so really looking at how do we support and redevelop those relationships that have maybe not been upheld by government and organizations, and redress through active community participation and listening to folks and understanding what their needs are. And stakeholder alignment and project management. So really looking at how do we work with these larger projects and align stakeholders that maybe have different opinions, different ideas, and different backgrounds into one common goal, and lead a project that makes sense for the community and actually solves the multi-level problems that we're trying to address in active transportation. And then our last aspect of our firm that we're kind of in case studying right now is our socioeconomic development. So realizing that to create sustainable systems, we also need to be regenerative. And so our question is like, how can we create mobility transportation systems that actually support in the regeneration of degraded ecosystems, degraded social cultures, and other spaces in cities that maybe have not been able to thrive. So our multicultural reentry program, we look at commercial development, mobility, and access. So as many of y'all know, Portland has a very racial hostile history with regard to urban renewal and economic development.
No, period. I think you need to mute your microphone.
Yeah, if everyone could please mute their microphone, that'd be great. And so as I was saying, Portland has a very racialized history when it comes to zoning and development. This is a map of the redlining history that was plagued in Portland. As you can see, the central city was categorized as red, which was with the categorization regarding kind of the least desirable land. Many people of color, particularly the Black community, found their neighborhood here. As development and urban renewal began, projects like the I-5 corridor, the Emmanuel Hospital project, and other projects really changed the makeup of that space. In an effort to redevelop that space and provide more services, it actually displaced a lot of the people that needed those services. And so when we think about multicultural reentry, commercial development, mobility, and access, we're really thinking about attempting to bring back people into those communities that now have those services that maybe they didn't have before, but in a really intentful and respectful way. So uplifting those people, particularly those in the Black and brown communities, disabled communities, older residents, and youth. The program is a response to kind of the multi-level issues that we're dealing with right now as a city and as a state. So those are, limited support for marginalized communities, unequitable opportunities for multicultural individuals and businesses, unequal access to program and funding, exclusion from decision-making, history of oppressive policies, inequity in public health and disproportionate impacts of COVID-19, inequities in transportation development, inequities in internet accessibility. So as you can see, there's a lot of challenges that we are dealing with as a state and as a city right now. And our program is really trying to look at that complex systems approach to addressing the multi-level issues that a lot of these development projects have put into communities, realizing that as displacement happens, communities are further and further and further from the city, and making it harder and harder for them to access resources, access community centers, and access those important things that they need. So mobility really is the helm of urban planning choice and urban planning democracy.
All right, so how do we go about doing our work? What are our processes and what are our goals? So broadly, in approaching our work, we employ a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility nexus. So within this nexus, emphasizing diversity means for us ensuring that everybody who defines or makes up a community is represented or benefits from the work that we're doing. Equity means striving for conditions, whether they be political, social, financial, etc., that would allow community members to be unhindered in their efforts. Inclusion points toward our belief that communities grow and prosper when everyone is included in both the fabric of society and also the decision-making processes, in government and municipal processes. And finally, accessibility reflects our belief that any progress that is achieved is meaningless unless everyone is able to take advantage of provided opportunities. So when we ground ourselves in these ideals, our work has started by emphasizing micro-entrepreneurship, commercial opportunities or equity and opportunity, in public health, and human-centered design. Regardless, these points of emphasis really serve to democratize opportunity and everything that is tangential to opportunity, and that especially pertains to mobility and access information. So specifically, We All Rise, our objectives have been to promote collaboration between residents, businesses, community leaders to facilitate community building and self-sufficiency. So our objectives are, for one, to ensure that municipal permitting processes are community-led and driven. So that means to familiarize communities with bureaucratic processes that frankly can be oppressive given the relative complexity, especially for small businesses or people who don't speak English as a first language. To provide design, instruction, and program implementation support for multicultural businesses. The third would be to focus Reentry programs on BIPOC and multicultural owned businesses to create opportunities for creative expression. This really stems from our recognition that Portland has a racist history, and that is often and continues to stifle wealth building in communities of color through prescriptive infrastructure projects and gentrifying policies. We support wealth building through community giving, grant writing, and sponsorship deals. The next would be to create cultural opportunities that are reflective of the BIPOC community, and to ensure accessibility at all events and engagement opportunities. And accessibility here extends to intellectual accessibility, physical accessibility, and emotional accessibility. And then the last would be to maximize collaboration with city government, community activists, residents, nonprofits, and interest groups. The way we see it, change comes from a place of understanding and empathy. And the more partnerships that we are able to create between different actors in the spaces that we work in, the more opportunities there are for growth.
Sorry about that. I was having trouble unmuting myself. So now we're going to kind of go into discussion about the different opportunities that we look at when we think about our DEIA nexus. So one of those that we mentioned was commercial opportunity. And we really think about this as equitable commercial opportunity. So understanding that many people, particularly people of color, have had a hostile relationship with a lot of the commercial buildings and commercial spaces that exist in this space. A lot of studies come out about discrimination around businesses, particularly small businesses of color on different streets, particularly Alberta, Mississippi, and other things. And so we're really looking at how do we realize that those things happen, respect the community experiences, but also begin to provide commercial opportunities to address those issues. And so last summer, when we got again, just want to make sure they have their sound muted as well. Thank you. So last summer and fall, We All Rise worked with PBOT, Healthy Business Permitting Program, to support in the free distribution of permits for businesses and retail spaces as they needed to reopen and open up on the public right of way. In this partnership, we realized that there were a lot of holes in the program, and a lot of businesses of color did not reside in spaces that actually made it safe for them to open up onto the street. For example, businesses on 82nd or businesses on Powell didn't really have the urban forum that made it feasible to use this program. And so a lot of the work that We All Rise did this past summer and fall was work with the city of Portland to redevelop and understand what are some other ways in which these type of businesses could be reopening. And so we worked with the Bureau of Development Services and Prosper Portland to come up with plans on how to use a very similar permit for maybe non-street-based reopening. So a reopening in parking spaces and other locations in areas that maybe are not as fitted for the urban forum. A lot of the work that we also did was support in the micro enterprise spaces as well. So not only using the Healthy Business Permitting Program for already existing brick and mortar spaces, but seeing how there was a way for us to provide commercial opportunity by giving free space to vendors to be able to reopen up in these permitted spaces.
Awesome. So more recently, this winter, we worked in downtown Portland in the Kinetic Collective, which was a multicultural marketplace that we opened in collaboration with 3 other local small businesses. And it was our first foray into downtown Portland. We're We're lucky that this building was provided to us free of charge under lease from Prosper Portland, Portland City Development Bureau. So the Kinetic Collective, in our view, represented both an opportunity to revitalize downtown Portland, which actually saw an 80% drop in visitation compared to previous years. So that obviously has massive impacts on small businesses in the area. But also to redefine who has been welcome in primarily white spaces. So ultimately, the purpose of this space was multifaceted. On the one hand, it served to bring in tourists and shoppers to a languishing downtown during the holiday season. And on the other hand, it served as an economic and educational opportunity for multicultural individuals. At the collective, all tenants were from underserved communities, and we brought in different vendors every weekend so that they could make sales at the space. We also invited musicians and dancers to create larger COVID-safe multicultural events. Along that note, we also recorded a show, Rise and Power Fest, which is going to be streamed on the Portland 5. This was a massive opportunity for artists who have seen few economic opportunities during the pandemic. We also coordinated with Pioneer Courthouse Square to create larger outdoor events that could safely accommodate more people. We invited vendors and dancers for 2 days for a free event for the public. And then finally, and this is a really important point, was we connected visitors in this space to a variety of different mobility options, including Spin, which is an e-scooter company, and TriMet, Portland's public transportation agency. We, as an organization, believe strongly that mobility is key to economic prosperity, but that the car isn't necessarily the solution. The attendant pollution, dangers from heavy traffic, the cost of maintenance of cars are all barriers to economic growth in disadvantaged communities. So ultimately, with all of these different components, the Kinetic Collective was a community center for the exchange of ideas, resources around mobility, and a means of building community, even in the most difficult times, which was this pandemic and continues to be. And this is a model economically and educationally that we hope to replicate in other spaces.
Yeah, the beauty of this program was looking at the concept of a mobility hub as a community center and being able to utilize the fact that it was located at the 10th and Yamhill building, which is across from the Yamhill Max station. And so really having that kind of approach of micromobility resources, transportation, transit-oriented development, and vendor programming. And so realizing that it's not enough just to help people get onto active transportation resources, but there needs to be adequate programming and development that encourages them to use those active transportation resources to get around their community. So in that similar grain, we're going to be talking about the concept of human-centered development and circular economic development. And so when we look at human-centered development, we're really looking at what are those ways in which we can create space that makes it feel like humans are supposed to be there. And a lot of time in city planning, we create these big projects, these large projects that don't really feel like we're a part of the community. And I think, when you're on the east side of Portland, there's a lot of different types of systems that look differently than a downtown. And so Alberta Street is one of the great examples of that, and looking at the collaborative approach to developing a Main Street, but we also have to realize the historical inequities that exist on Alberta Main Street as well. And so what we were able to do in this period of time and kind of work with Alberta Main Street is looking at how do you re-socialize and reclaim space for communities that have been displaced. And what is the authentic way in doing so? And how can you actually build back a community and redefine what it means to be in a space? And so what we really tried to do was took a holistic approach to re-entering those folks who maybe have been previously displaced. So starting with our commercial vendor pop-up markets and allowing for vendors to pop up next to retail and businesses that are similar in nature to them to be able to spur customer base and develop a customer base, but then also looking more nuanced, but also like looking at how do we get other businesses in the area to support those vendors through technical assistance and mentorship. We also were supported Alberta Main Street in redeveloping last Thursday to be virtual and ensuring that artists and collaborators have the opportunity to still share their wares and share their music to the community. We are now in the process of creating an eco arts district in Alberta. So realizing that sustainability and regeneration is really important to the district, and understanding how can we create frameworks that not only bring back people to the space, but also make sure that new people can build relationships in the space and that those relationships are regenerative and keep adding to the development of Alberta. And in the next iteration, we're going to be really focusing on creating recreational spaces for children, art installations, and economic development opportunities for those who want to be a part of the community again. In that similar grain, we're also working with Apano. We've been working with Apano for the past year to develop critical resources and support in the distribution of those critical resources to businesses that have been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. We realize that the Asian community has been equally, if not more hard as the Black community and other minority communities in the space, and really realizing that it's important that we uplift those restaurants and support those restaurants. So we've been working with Apano to understand what businesses need, how to better develop the permitting processes, outreach materials to fit within folks that maybe do not speak English, and how can we actually make sure that Asian Americans and all people feel comfortable in Portland and feel that the resources that are there for them are actually going to be able to support them in times of need. And then kind of on the other grain, we have our public health and mobility concepts, and really thinking about public health in a twofold way, realizing that the pandemic has reopened our understanding of what the social determinants of health are and how people of color inequitably feel those, but then also looking at public health in kind of that long-term way and realizing that active transportation can really be a tool to better support in the healthy aspects of communities. And so really, using micromobility tools as a re-socialization tool, but also as a way to make sure that people have a more active lifestyle that maybe haven't had the opportunity for generations to do that. And maybe this might be the first time. And so in that grain, we're currently working with PBOT, their Bike Town program, to help lead trips that will be in conjunction with their Prescribe a Bike program, which is a program that prescribes a bike for folks who maybe need more exercise or maybe just need to have more healthy lifestyle, looking at what influences can a bike have on the actual individual health of someone. And, we want to be taking that further and how can we not only look at physical health, but psychological and emotional health? So realizing that, displacement, gentrification, the past year has been really hard for people of color, especially Black people, and especially Asian folks. So when we're doing these programs, how can we not only make people feel more comfortable riding around on bikes and feeling that they have spaces to go to? So we're going to be leading a number of trips that will be getting people out into the community on bikes, learning about the different resources when it comes to parks and bike lanes, but then also getting to have that reclaiming of space and re-socialization of space when it comes to spaces that they might have gone to when they were a kid, but now being able to go there again as an adult on a bike. We also work really closely with TriMet and really believe that it takes a village of transportation authorities and organizations to really solve the mobility issues that we have in our city and our state. Currently, we're working on the Hollywood Transit Center Memorial strategic planning and trying to understand how do we memorialize events and uplift histories that maybe might not be as inclusive, but realize that we need to have this conversation and realize that conversations around topics around race, topics around advocacy, topics around militations and topics around, are really important for us to have as a community. And mobility spaces, when done correctly and done with intention, can actually be a space for us to have that conversation. And then in a similar grain, we also helped TriMet reimagine their public safety and security program. And so really thinking about those multifaceted levels of safety and security. So not just thinking about physical safety, but what does it mean for people of color and other folks to feel emotionally safe and psychologically safe on mobility spaces. And lastly, we are currently working with Oregon Department of Transportation, with Kettleson and Associates and HDR on the Oregon City Westland pedestrian bike bridge. This bridge is part of ODOT's new kind of strategic plan to advance racial equity, modern transportation systems and come up with strategic ways to actually ensure that they have the capital investment they need to continue projects. In this process, we were able to develop a youth advisory committee, which is one of the first of its kind in ODOT. These are a number of high school students and college students that are advising the project and providing information on use cases and different situations that might be happening in the local area that the project team might not have as much information on. We are currently the diversity consultants for the project. So our role is to go into the project and understand what are ways in which ODOT can be better, what are ways in which the community can be better served, and how can we ensure that this project is achieving the equity goals that are brought into the space. So, as you can see, like, it's not just organizations, nonprofits, but government agencies are also looking at ways in which we can better serve folks and be more supportive.
Okay, so the last piece, and in my opinion, as someone with a background in education, one of the most important pieces is education and involvement. The reality is that unless there's sufficient education, good education or access to resources, as well, as a democratized education system, we're not going to be able to connect people to good transportation models. So really, a well-rounded education for us is the foundation for any successful social justice movement, and we believe that knowledge is power, and that gatekeeping is preventing community involvement in decision-making processes, as they relate to urban and regional planning, permitting, mobility, and economic opportunity. So one of the primary ways that We'll Rise is going to start responding to this is through a program with Southeast Uplift. In this program, we're going to be teaching a program that fosters coalition building among underserved community members, centering on the idea that planning needs to be more accessible and include diverse individuals, and in that process, center land use and transportation planning as a means to encourage political participation in order to sort of change the outcomes that we're seeing in cities like Portland. Some of the major objectives include encouraging voter activation in underserved communities, providing background on historical means of oppression in transit development, policy, and housing, thinking critically about accessing new voter blocks in communities that are often left out of the political process, using new knowledge to develop planning and policy-based programming for all communities, regardless of historical efforts of oppression, and engaging underserved communities in planning and land use efforts. And then the last one would be understanding the connection between planning, policy, and politics. To get there, we're going to be focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility, zoning and policy laws, the sources of inequitable power structures, equitable space creation, current developments in land use planning, circular economic principles and smart grid planning, and effective communication and outreach, which are essential in building any movement. And we know that a lot of this information to the layperson might seem a bit mundane, but the reality is that so many times laws and policy concepts that seem mundane are the most effective at codifying and maintaining systems of oppression. And this is oftentimes one of academia's and the legal system's greatest powers, which is its power of exclusion, that doesn't support historically marginalized communities in accessing information and opportunities. So the program is designed to address some of these major gaps that are oftentimes not addressed. So the Oregon Museum of Science and Industry was another area that we worked. We often in large scale projects notice there's massive gaps in representation. Right now, OMSI and the surrounding district are planning a large scale multi-stage development project that's supposed to be resilient to climate change, accessible to diverse populations, and built with circular economic principles in mind. The new district, for example, will incorporate sensors to minimize waste, include lots of greenery, such as endemic and native plants and bioswales, have community gardening, potentially easy access to active transportation and public transit options, and affordable housing options. And these are all fantastic intentions. But the issue that we noted when we started joining these planning meetings was that they consisted nearly entirely of older white and male presenting individuals. And as an organization, we believe that diverse perspectives, and especially youth perspectives, are really important when we're planning new community developments. So what we did is we recruited a team of diverse college students to participate in planning meetings, engage with professionals, academics, city officials and learn more about the planning process at the highest levels. All right, so what's the future? Well, we believe that it's going to be a multitude of things that move Portland toward the future. Generally, the purpose of our work is to make life better for everybody. And in that sense, we don't have a complex mission. We came to this work when we realized as young people entering Portland's economy that there remain many roadblocks to a just future. Some of the things that we noticed include Portland's history of redlining, gentrification, et cetera, that continue having a significant impact on outcomes for Portlanders. We noted that the pandemic highlighted this future much more than it already was, and that businesses, depending on who ran them, where they were in the city, had varying levels of support economically during the pandemic, and sometimes were overlooked by programs that were designed to help them, or not connected to them correctly. We noticed that many artists and musicians were severely impacted, and this is an issue even under normal circumstances. We don't properly support our artists, and we noticed significantly that we're living in antiquated cities designed for the car, which are inefficient and inherently inequitable. Communities of color and local communities are especially impacted by this inequitable design. And while gentrified areas now are becoming increasingly accessible for those who get around by foot and by bike, this is not the case in the further reaches of the city, where people have been made to move in gentrified areas, which continue to rely on the car for transportation. And this means that they have to deal with increased pollution, traffic, and have to navigate dangerous roads on a daily basis. So clearly this isn't just. We also noticed how accessible civic life is. The fact that the legislature remains, around 93 to 95% white, and that's also the same in most municipal offices. So there's a lack of political diversity, and that means that political decisions are not representative of the people in Oregon, which is becoming an increasingly diverse state. So we need to be encouraging civic participation as a means to allow people to be their own advocates. And then lastly, we are in a climate crisis. We're currently in one of, if not the driest springs on record. It has not really rained this April. So we are feeling the impacts. Biodiversity is disappearing. Diverse communities are seeing harsher impacts. In cities like Portland, infrastructure in lower income neighborhoods tends toward unlivability when they suffer from impacts such as the heat island effect. So going forward, multiculturalism is the answer. And it's a multifaceted concept that, for one, acknowledges that we're all in the same boat. We do all have different life experiences and have experienced different degrees of oppression based off of that background in the United States. But we all benefit from equity. Equity and opportunity, not only does equity and opportunity and in mobility and civic access save lives, but it benefits the economy. No one's benefiting when political decisions uplift corporate profits at the expense of the environment. Sustained traffic deaths, and pollution as a result of inequitable city planning are making our urban spaces aesthetically displeasing, but that also lowers the quality of life for people and burdens our healthcare system. And when we don't uplift diverse businesses, that can increase crime as a neighborhood become no longer economically sustainable. So ultimately, progress really does need to be collaborative, and we need to be focusing on sustainability because we all live on this planet, and we have to recognize that these practices have trapped us in a nearly intractable situation. So we need to be working together. And the further we gentrify, the more reliance there is on things like the car, and that further impoverishes those who have to rely on it. So we need more civic engagement for more climate warriors. And that is really the future. These are just some examples though, and in the end, we are operating at We All Rise on the premise that Portland and Oregon have been and are profoundly inequitable, and that to address these, we need to make sure that everybody has agency. And this means providing opportunity, responding to burdens, and distributing resources equitably. And ultimately that means making sure that everybody has access to multiple options for mobility.
Awesome. Thank you, Aiden, for wrapping that up. And so now we're going to go into our activity. And so feel free to hold your questions. There will be some time at the end, but in that kind of grain of collaboration and getting folks together and trying to solve these issues, we thought it would be a really good opportunity for us to have a discussion on this. And so this activity is going to be looking at, we're going to be kind of looking at these discussion questions. And first of all, kind of trying to understand, how can we take these processes and programs, implement them across Oregon and the country? So like, there are definitely a lot of spaces that could use a program like this. How do we do that in spaces that are not Portland? How do we measure and evaluate the impact of DEI work? It can be hard when, we're doing work that is not necessarily something that we can track from a data standpoint. So, when professionals in the DEI space are really trying to understand, like, how do we not recreate the same ways of observation and data collection that have been present for years and have led us into these inequitable systems? And what are some ways that we can, storyboard, interview, and get to like those oral traditions that lead us to understanding our impact from a DEI standpoint? And then our last question that we really want to understand is, how do you create programs that address historical missteps within marginalized communities who may not see the utility of active transportation programming and infrastructure? So these are going to be our questions, and we're going to open it up to the group. So feel free to raise your hand or ask to comment in the chat, and we'll let you all comment and we'll go from there. So if anyone has any ideas surrounding this, feel free to unmute yourself. I will stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. If no one answers, I will call on people. So I'll give you guys a couple more minutes to kind of think about like what that looks like and what are some ideas in which we can collaborate on doing this. And yes, I will share the questions in the chat. Thank you, Emma. I'll do that right now.
Could you restate the question?
Yes. So the first question that we're going to be looking at is, how do we recreate these type of programs outside of Portland into other spaces in Oregon?
Do you want us just to talk, or do you want us to?
Just feel free to share, Randy. Do you have any ideas on what?
Well, I know the only thing that really works with other communities is alliances and partnerships, which those are already present there and trusted in their own communities. So I think to be able just to go into one to assume that you might be able to make an impact would be the wrong approach, other than form the alliances. Also, another question for you, which might help us a little bit, or at least me. What's the business model of your organization, and how do you exist? Are you do you raise revenue from public sources? How do you work?
Yeah, totally. So we're a consulting firm. So we raise revenue by actually doing the work that we're saying that we're doing. So we work on a number of projects on a case-by-case level. We also work with organizations that have the mission to do this work as well. So we'll partner with them and do more collaborative projects. So for example, we're working on projects with Portland Bureau of Transportation, working with projects with Oregon Department of Transportation. We're also working on a project with the Livable Streets Alliance in Boston, New Urban Mobility Alliance and out of DC, and other organizations that kind of sit in the mobility space. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
So Emma in the chat, feel free to, if you would like to bring that up and talk about the City of Springfield program, that would be really cool. And then Kim also mentioned in Central and Eastern Oregon, we have not been serving the Latinx community. Technology and language barriers prevent engagement transportation. Are there any ideas on how to do this better? That's a really good question, Kim. I think, it's hard when you may not have folks who speak languages or understand cultural differences in communities. I think we've experienced that a lot here as well. The biggest thing is meeting folks where they're at and coming to some type of shared understanding and collaboration. So there's a reason why people live in communities, and they choose to live in those communities because they want to be there generally. And so when we're trying to meet someone that we maybe haven't talked to or gotten with, how do we need to meet them in the middle. We need to respect them. We need to get we need to understand and learn about them before we go in and try to come and be prescriptive. And so I think that's the first step. I think the second step is also just, feeling okay with learning Spanish or finding someone who can speak Spanish, that understands the nuances of how the Spanish language is different and how wants and needs are articulated very differently in Spanish. And that doesn't always translate into English. And so it's really important to have someone who knows the language, who knows the different cultural differences that might be present in different Latino communities. I think a lot of time Latinos are lumped into one group, but people that are from Honduras, people that are from Puerto Rico, people that are from Mexico, all have their different opinions and ideas. And so it's important that we still uplift folks differently based off their own individual needs. And that really just means sitting down and having a conversation with them. It seems Robert has his hand up, so feel free to speak, Robert.
Oh, thanks. I just put my comment in the chat. Great presentation. It's really exciting to learn about what you're working on, and hopefully our paths will cross at some point and we'll get to work together. But I just wanted to point out that the question that you posed, I'm from Portland, but if I weren't from Portland, it might strike me as slightly presumptuous because it just sounded like there was a assumption that these approaches weren't already being used elsewhere in Oregon. So I would just suggest maybe asking non-Portlanders in the room if any of these approaches are already being used in their communities. And I appreciated Emma's example of the Lane County of Governments. That sounds like a great non-Portland example. But yeah, thanks for presenting today.
Yeah, totally. I think like the biggest thing that I've noticed in Oregon is like we are so focused on Portland that all of our resources are put into kind of the Portland space. And I guess my question was, realizing that these things are happening everywhere, but there aren't a lot of people of color in other spaces in Portland outside of Portland, so it can be harder and even more challenging and isolating for those folks. And so when we're thinking about those things in communities that are different demographically, what are some ways and nuances that might be different in a Lane community or a Lane County community or in Eugene or in Bend that would change the way in which we'd go about doing a program like in Portland, if that makes sense? I'm going to read some of the comments in the chat. One idea is providing ways to encourage community-based transportation groups. Often there are institutional barriers to local action when it comes to public transportation. Some cities such as Wilsonville have managed to create local systems smart, which is quite a good model, but complexities on funding and legal responsibilities can be difficult. I think that's a really good point. It's really important that, those kind of local transportation organizations that can be centered around, TDM issues or getting people access to transportation can be a really good way of meeting people in the community. But you bring up a really good point among the funding and legal responsibilities, because a lot of those organizations don't actually have the legal power to do something or the funding to be able to continue doing the work. And so I think it's like when we do create those type of programs or businesses, it's important that when we do that, we do it in a sense of that it's going to be there for a really long time. It's collaboratively developed, and they have the power and the responsibility to be able to enact change when change is necessary. And then Zachary, I think a big part of this work is naming those prescriptive structures and objective goals that come from conventional planning and engagement plans. I think the conversation needs to start by being honest and reflective on the values that are leading the project and discussing how values can and sometimes should change. And how does this change the way we hold space and prioritize different outcomes, processes, and milestones in the project? Zachary, that's a really good point. I think objectives can be really, that the word objective can already be prescriptive. And so I think when we're trying to come up with a project we actually need to be doing community engagement first and understanding like what are the issues and challenges, if it's mobility, if it's housing or anything that the community is actually dealing with. And then how do we take those ideas and bring that into a project statement? And then that allows us to then start developing these objectives and these goals that actually are listening in the community, and actually bringing up those concerns and bringing them into the actual discussion. So I think like, and then you can have those times where you can actually change the outcomes and the processes and the milestones as the community is still involved in that process, and you can course correct the project. So if we see something going really, really far down the road and it's wrong, when there's community there, the objectives are collaboratively developed. We have the ability to stop, ask ourselves why it's gone this way, and course correct. And I think that's really important for these types of projects. I see Randy has his hand up as well. So.
Thank you. You also asked about the possibility of, excuse me, of a national reach. And so I just wanted to inform everybody actually on this call of what might be helpful in that regard. So even though I'm a private business guy, I've been very civically involved here, but I have been leading best practice trips all over the country and the world for over 30 years. And we go into other communities with a setup agenda to understand a lot of the issues you're talking about and also what they've done, which have been successful over years, and also the challenges that they've tried to overcome and failed at. And we've learned a tremendous amount from these communities. And anybody's invited to come along that wants to come along on these trips. Our next one, by the way, is in October in Nashville, which has a lot of opportunities but challenges. But what we've learned in these communities, which kind of underscores everything, is that each one of these places and regions has their own ethos. Mm-hmm. And when we talk about our wonderful community engagement here, which we know that we're at the top of the heap in civic engagement in Portland relative to the rest of the country, when we learn about how those other cultures operate and how they try to define issues and how they go about executing on some of their solutions, it really is so subject to that ethos in that particular community. And so it's kind of hard to have a prescribed way to approach these things. You really do have to understand what they're all about, what their mindset is, and then kind of meld into it. And so then offer the solution around who they really are. And it's been probably, for the 33 years I've been leading these trips, is probably the most salient point that we've learned about how to approach other problems or something here. We learn from them a lot, but we got to put it within the dynamic of our local community.
And that's such a good point, Randy. Honestly, like that's why We All Rise started, was out of the understanding that like we as young people from Portland who grew up here, who went to college wanting to change these things, we're not given the ability or the resources to actually support and develop in the community that we knew how to develop. And so I think, in that same grain, it's like, that's the lesson that we all need to learn. I think overall is that we can't be prescriptive. We can't come into a community that we do not know and try to put in our own ideas and thoughts. It really has to be like, if we're consultants, if we're supposed to be supporting a community, we need to come in there with our knowledge and do what they tell us to do. And we need to come as a service and not as a prescription. And so I think like what we're trying to do is uplift those people that are already doing that work in their community, giving them a platform, giving them funding and support to be able to do so, so that they can continue doing that and have that authentic ownership of their community. And I think that's why me as a co-founder, I'm so focused on making sure that people that we hire are from Portland, have grown up here, that don't have access to these resources already, so they can actually be a part of that. And before we were starting to work in Eugene as well, but already going in and redeveloping and trying to figure out how do we build those relationships with the people that are already doing the work, so that we can empower them to do the work and support them in that work, and then we can leave and not have to be there anymore. And I think the goal of this type of work is that you should come in, support, and then you should be able to leave and not have to worry about what's going on, because you've already built a system that is going to sustain itself and regenerate itself.
That kind of goes back to my earlier comment about partnerships and alliances within those communities to do that. I'm going to put in chat my email address, so if anybody's interested in these best practice trips as we move forward, would like to come along with us. I said, everybody's invited. And it's a wonderful, not only opportunity to see other communities, but also to learn more about our own community, because we always have more than 100 Portland area leaders on these that have their own dynamic and look at things through their own lens. We learn just as much about our own community as we do the one we're visiting.
I see Emma has got their hand up in the chat. So like,
Yeah, so I've been pondering the smaller Oregon community question. I am glad to be at OATS. I'm glad that virtual access makes it easier for those of us in other parts of the state to attend. I still am hearing the common theme of Portland-centric kind of communication, messaging, talk. So I'm really glad that you asked a question that's inviting those of us in other places in the state to share our experiences and perspectives. So I'm in the city of Springfield, right next to Eugene in Lane County. And I think one of the strengths that smaller communities have is that there are fewer people in our community. So there's more likely to be a close connection between city councilors, planning commissioners, people on the advisory committees, and the broader community. Whereas like I grew up in Hillsborough and familiar with the Portland context, there's just a lot more people. And when there's a lot more people involved, some of those connections and conversations I don't think happen quite as naturally. That being said, who you know matters a lot. And there are certain populations that don't have the ears of the city councilors or the board of commissioners as much as others. I think that's shifting recently. But just thinking about those interpersonal relationships and who's talking to whom and how that then plays out in community engagement processes, in policy decisions, and project priorities. I think it is beneficial that with a smaller, more nimble local government, the city council and city manager's office can more nimbly direct staff because there's fewer layers of staff to work on priorities. Given that I'm in transportation, sometimes I feel like, oh, well, I'm not necessarily the person to decide the bigger picture value question of, do we prioritize working on housing or transportation or economic development or our current development permitting? But I'm more closely connected to the city councilors and the staff who are making those higher level decisions that then direct the rest of the work. I really appreciated Chris Wachi's comment in the chat about creative ways of engaging in person during a pandemic through the food pantries across Lane County for the Bike Master Plan project that we've been working on. And I think there was one other thing. I guess one kind of challenge that we have in smaller communities is that there aren't as many staff to support different efforts. So we have support from our city council to expand bike share down here. And yet, as the only transportation planner with the city, my workload's already full. And I'm like, okay, that's something our community wants. There are suppliers that could potentially provide it, but it also does take staff to support some of these community desired initiatives. Whereas I think at PBOT, there's a person who works on bike corrals and there's a person who works on bike share and e-scooters. So that's just a very different context depending on the staff structures.
And Emma, so thank you so much for bringing it up. I think Lane County does an amazing job in terms of active transportation. So I'm always super impressed with the work being done down there. And I think you bring up such a good perspective and kind of why we wanted to focus this conversation on involving community members to spearhead conversations and spearhead projects, because we realize that in our current budgetary processes, it's just like there's not enough staff in city government to do the work that actually needs to get done. And so we actually need to rely on community members to do a lot of the work that we need to get done as a city or as a state or as a region. And so, but a lot of community members feel like that they haven't been really heard in those processes. And so there's a really great opportunity right now in all parts of Oregon to open up people to be able to collaborate on projects, but also rebuild those relationships of folks who maybe might not as be involved to get them involved again. And so, when I think about bike share programs in Lane County, I instantly think about Fourth Mobility. I think about like Peace Health. I think about like the students at U of O who like would be really interested in that. And so, feel free to reach out, but just, I think there's a lot of opportunities in that space and really uplifting the collaborative culture that exists in Lane County around active transportation. So I also want to really uplift Christian's comment as well. I think it's really important to kind of have that circular approach to bike planning and mobility planning. Like, it's not just mobility planning, and it's also service planning. So if you're building a master plan, what are some of the services that you can add on to those bike infrastructure spaces that will solve all the other community needs as well? And so I think with streets, when we think about reimagining the public right of way, we have an opportunity to reimagine how streets can serve community members. And I think in the pandemic, we've seen so much new ways of doing that. And I think what we're really hoping at We All Rise is that we continue that movement and continue to reopen the public right of way to service the public. Another comment that I really wanted to uplift was Zachary's comment. Was it Zachary's comment? It was a comment about realizing that each community is different, and that each community has its own set of rules and ideas and knowledges and thoughts. And so we can't actually take these programs and put them in to another community. We have to go into that community and understand what type of programs are needed. And so these things, these case studies, these ideas are great to think about, but We All Rise is really trying to get people and help the field move away from a case study analysis to take ideas and put them into other spaces, but try to go into the community and understand what do they need and want, and start having a more service planning model. And so if that makes sense, that's kind of what we're hoping that people can gather from this conversation, and take into their spaces as they continue, and realize, Emma, as you mentioned so perfectly, that in Oregon, we focus a lot on Portland, and it's not fair to the communities that are there and need the support as well. And when we think about mobility, we are a state that is really environmentally sustainable and really focused on mobility, but we have such an opportunity now to not have that just be a Portland focus, but have that be a focus in all of our cities and all of our regions, and really collaborate as a state to change the perspective of our state as being maybe hostile to our folks of color, and really through a institutional and collaborative approach, re-enter folks of color into these spaces, be it politically, be it through community engagement, be it through community projects, and understand that re-entry doesn't just mean re-entry of space, but it means re-entry of relationships. It means re-entry of people. It means re-entry of culture. And so we have to start thinking about things in a way that can really allow for everyone to feel comfortable and supported in the ways in which they want to be in space, so they can share and explain what they need, so they can feel like space works for them. So with that, if there's any other questions, we have a couple more minutes. Feel free to ask those in the chat, or if you want to just come off mute, you can do so.
Quincy, could you drop your email address as well as Aiden's in the chat in the event that folks have questions that are kind of sitting on for right now? And in that way, thank you so much for doing that. If you have some other questions for Quincy or Aiden, their email addresses are now in the chat. So please make a note of that. There will be a recording of this session once things officially wrap up. But we do have, it looks like we have 1 more minute to go. So Aiden, Quincy, take it away.
I was going to say, thank you, Judge. And then one thing I was going to say is, when we talk about solving the first and last mile and solving these gaps in transportation, the only reason why we have these gaps in transportation is because we're not working together. And so I think what I'm hoping this year and this presentation really shows people is that if we want to start solving these equity issues, we want to start solving these first and last mile issues, if we want a transportation system that is adequate, sustainable, and regenerative, then we really need to be collaborative in that approach, and we need to work together with everyone.
Thank you again, Quincy and Aiden, for this amazing presentation. Thank you to all of you who have attended this session, for investing the time and opportunity in being better at what we do and learning about how we can improve our neighborhoods and communities. On behalf of the Street Trust, as well as our sponsors listed on the SCED platform, thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of the summit. Take care.